Alright, music theory time, music theory time! We're going to begin our first video with a quote by avant-garde composer John Cage, who is also a brilliant thinker about music. I'd like to expand to music theory. There is music theory all around us, if only we had the ears to hear. And that's what we're here to do. We're here to understand music a little better. And music theory is a great system of doing that because no matter what music is playing, there's always some sort of music theory happening. There's some people setting rules and some people breaking them. That's why it's so much fun. Okay, so a quick overview of what we're going to be doing. First is scale degrees, which is just numbers assigned to each part of the scale, 1 through 7, and then 8, which is one repeating. Diatonic triads and seventh chords. And we're going to be going through specific diatonic triads and specific diatonic seventh chords in which scale degrees are needed to make up each one. And lastly, my personal favorite is Roman numeral notation. And this is also 1 through 7 and one repeating, but specifically mean chords. A great way to get visual examples of what we're talking about in these videos is to click the link at the top of our resources page. It gives examples of diatonic chords in major and minor keys and gives you an example on the keyboard and on the staff for both. Also make sure to read your summaries for chapters 3 and 4. This way you know what to do, and it's really good to have the book handy while we do this kind of stuff. Let's get to it. We got scale degrees, we got diatonic triads and seventh chords, we got Roman numeral notation. It's gonna be good. Okay, so let's start by breaking down major scales by number instead of by a note name. This shows us that all relationships, even though they are different note names, are the same. They all have the same amount of pitches, 1 to 8, 8 being the repeated note at the top, and the same intervals that you see in red, or relationships between each note. So for instance, the first and second note of every major scale are always a whole step apart, and the third and fourth are always a half step apart. And you see these also mean major second and minor second. Now this is true for every single major scale, but let's just use C as an example. C major, so we C, D, E, F, G, A, B, and C again at the top. So yes, these are the notes in the C major scale, and yes, those are the intervals, but how can we apply what we've learned here to other major scales? Also, how can we form the triads? Scale degrees are what help us out. So we first have our roots, and then we have our branches and our leaves. The root is always 1. We always, in every triad, call the root 1, and then in triads, there's always the 3 and the 5, and always the same relationships. It's 1, 3, 5 for the triads. So now that we have the idea down that every major scale conforms to the same pattern and that every note in that pattern has a number, it'll be easier to understand when we see it written in musical notation on the staff. Here's the same scale we were just talking about with our scale degrees and then our note names just for reference. Yep, there's our C scale, and then our intervals in between each note, whole or half depending on which note to which note. Let's figure out our first C major triad. Triad, of course, being a chord with 3 notes in it in root position. So we have C, E, and G, or 1, 3, and 5, as we figured out earlier. Let's see that all together on the staff. There we go. C, E, and G. And what are the intervals in between here? We have whole plus a whole, then half plus a whole. So that means a major third plus a minor third is what that eventually becomes. C, E, and G translates into 1, 3, 5, as you can see right there. 1, 3 is a major third, and then 3 to 5 is a minor third. This is all a perfect fifth, or the 1 going all the way to the 5, the lowest to the highest note. We write this as a 1, 5, 3, 1, or just a 1 because we assume that it's in root position. Now I know what you're thinking. We have C, E, and G making up a C major triad, but what about this C up here? It's still just as good if we use that one, right? You're right. In fact, it's a cooler version of a C major triad. It's what we call an inversion. So the first inversion of C major triad goes like this. Instead of C being on bottom, or the bass note, we have E as the bass note. E, then G and C above it somewhere. And that translates into the third, the fifth, and then the original root is on top. But since they're new intervals, we call the lowest one 1, and then a third above it, and then a sixth above the bass note at the lowest note. In Roman numeral notation, we call this 1, 6, 3, 1, or for shorthand, we have 1, 6. Let's go back to triads. Remember how we made that happen? We had a root and then a third above that and then a third above that. So that translates into 1, then a third above is 3, then a third above that is 5. Well, let's add another third on top. That means 1, 3, 5, 7, or our first seventh chord. Oh, and by the way, your book wants you to check out 1, 3, 5 equals a major triad, but it also wants you to check out the fact that lowered third and lowered fifth means a diminished, or let's see, just a lowered third equals a minor triad. That's right. And then, oh yeah, and also just a raised fifth equals augmented. But right now, that's not really important. You just need to know 1, 3, 5. If you click the second link on our resources page, then you'll see the seventh chords diagrammed on staff and on piano yet again in this awesome website in major and minor keys. Okay, now it's time to really step it up. We have our C major triad already, which has the same relationships between the root, the third, and the fifth as any major triad, but let's add the seventh on top, which is a third on top of our original triad. A third plus a third plus a third, all on top of the root. It's another note, another layer of mystery, but right now it's just important to remember that we have our scale written out with our scale degrees and our notes just for reference. Also, we're going to do relationships in major and minor half step. One way to remember this pretty easily is that the third and the fourth is a minor second, and then the seventh going up to the top to the eighth is a minor second. Let's get our triad out on the staff, and then add that third on top and see what it looks like. That's a C major 7 chord. The reason we say major 7 is because the highest note, B, is a major 7 above the original C. Now let's check out this chord in root position and then in inversion. Let's translate C, E, G, and B into numbers. There our scale degrees are of 1, 3, 5, and 7. The relationships are a major third, then a minor third, then a major third again, or our original perfect fifth triad with a major seventh above our root or bass note. We call this an 1 major 7. This is all capital because it's all major. Now let's check out the same chord but in first inversion. We have all the notes that we need, and let's stick that C somewhere else. So it doesn't really matter. Let's just make sure that the E is on bottom. The E is the new bass note, which tells you that it's an inversion. That means that it's a 1, then a third above, then a fifth above, then a sixth above for all the notes. The whole thing is from lowest to highest is minor sixth with 4 notes, which is your clue that it's a seventh chord. We call that I6-5-3-1 or just I6-5 for short notation.